Welcome to Sis to Sis. Hey, 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 y'all. Did y'all miss us? Because we sure missed you. Look, watch, like, and subscribe to our channel at Sister Sis 1988, as well as follow us on all our social media platforms at Sister Sis 1988. We're coming back in, finishing up with Miss Higgins. And again, we do appreciate you taking the time out to speak with us today. We're going to let Toya go ahead and get back into her questions.
So my next question is, what strategies do you have about teaching children about managing money at an early age?
So yeah, there's lots of different ways, right? So the way I was taught, because I am one of 7, so I had a large family. So my mom didn't do allowance. It just was not in the budget, but we were allowed to do extra chores in the house. So we had 1 chore a week that we had to do. But if we wanted to earn money, we could do extra chores. And that was what she allowed for us to buy certain things. Then for my daughter, because I only have the one, we ended up giving her an allowance. And so there were times that I would be like, okay, I want to buy her something. And so I would. And there's other times she's like, hey, Mom, can I have that? And I'm like, well, do you have money? And she's like, oh, and it's like that. It has to come out of my money. And so I think that's a great stepping stone, either one of those ways, right? They have their own money. They can start exploring their true purchases. I was working with a client and she wanted me to coach her 2 children, and they were 14 and 16. And I asked them, so it was so interesting. I asked this, it was the 14-year-old first. I was talking to her about money and I said, do you know where money comes from? And I think this is something that is so important to educate our children on. But the 14-year-old says, she kind of paused and looked at me and she turned and looked at her mom. And I said, it does not come from your mom, and it's like that. Yeah, I just loved it. So then following up with her brother just shortly after. So now we're a 16-year-old, now we're a boy, right? He's sitting there. I'm like, do you know where money comes from? He's like, yeah, it comes from the mint. And I'm like, oh, so he went clear to the other side. And I'm like, okay, yeah, no, money for you comes from an employer or somebody that you do work for, And so I think that's important to realize, especially after I asked those 2 that question, I'm like, it's very important for us to start teaching children where money comes from. I heard a podcast one time, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was. And he says, I always heard, well, money doesn't grow on trees. And he goes, but they never told me where it came from. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how simple, right? You have to work to get money. And so, even though I gave my daughter an allowance, it was, you have to do these things to get money. And I think it starts there. And then, whatever you feel is important to you as a parent, because personal finances are personal. Whether you want to encourage them to save, maybe you have expectations for them to pay for their own college later. So maybe that's something they need to save for, or they need to buy their own vehicle when they're 16, whatever it is. Lay those expectations on them as they are starting to earn money. And what does that look like? Don't all of a sudden go, hey, you got to provide your support for all of these things, So I think, just baby stepping them through to age appropriate. And as parents, I think you can decide what that is.
Sounds good to me. I kind of wish we've spoken about this, the 3 of us, in the previous shows and our early shows when we first got started. We kind of wish that somebody would have really set us down and did that financial education for us, because that wasn't provided. Most of what we have is what we did on our own. Now, my parents weren't spenders, they were flourishly just spending or anything like that. At the same time, I do believe that, I guess to me, it seemed like we were always looking for extra, if that makes sense. We always never had it. That's how I felt. And recently I asked them, I was like, back in the day when we used to, let's just say the air conditioning in the car went out. Okay. We just talked about Texas summers. And I told them, did we really not have the money to get that fixed? Or y'all was just being, what's really going on? Y'all was just wanting to sweat people out. They was like, no, we really don't. You said what? What she said?
I said, not sweat people out.
If the air conditioner don't work in Texas in that car,
I know. That's torture.
That's torture. And the window down ain't making nothing no better.
No, that's hot air.
Did we really not have it, or did you just want to punish us? Really, it's like we always had it. We ain't got it, So I do see the value in teaching kids that, but I often wonder at times, is that provided in education now at school? Because it really wasn't provided when I was going.
Yeah,
And we
no.
had like you can know, teach how to cook, teach how to wash, but it was never anything about money, saving money, or learning about money.
Yeah, I know they have a class. I don't know exactly what their objectives are in it. I would
Okay.
love to actually go and teach it myself, because I'm like, oh, I could do so much fun with that, right? For a whole semester of a class to just
Bet you'd be great.
encourage them and teach them. Yeah, I would love, love, love to do that. But, I think, as you know, I had a guest on my podcast, and he has been around for years, and he's educating 3 to 7-year-olds. So he does a lot of music and coloring books and, like YouTube cartoons for them. And I'm like, well, how do we fix this? And he goes, we don't. We're not even really good at, taking care of our own debt. How are we going to teach people how to do financial literacy? And I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. Even though he's such a huge proponent. But I think as families, and like you were saying, Jamie, that, like I just felt like we just didn't have enough. And I know I get in certain spaces and there's moms that are like, I was told we didn't have money growing up. We didn't have enough. And it always scared me. And I don't want to teach my kids that. I'm like, okay, then tell them what you do have money for, and start off from that positive. Okay, so this month, this is what we're covering. And so the extra is this. We think we're going to do this or this. And just kind of letting them know that we're okay. Because when kids hear we don't have money, they think they're going to lose the roof over their head. They're not going to have any food to eat, right? That whole extreme. And so, yes, you got to be wise with your words. I remember going to the grocery store with my mom and begging to get sugar cereal. And she's since gone, so I haven't been able to ask her. As I've just been figuring this out in my mind, I'm like, Mom, can I get her sugar cereal? She'd be like, no, not this week. And I thought it was like cost. Well, no, I used to think it was health. Like, oh, she doesn't want me to have sugar cereal. We always have, corn checks or corn flakes or the boring stuff, And so once in a while, she'd be like, okay, you can get it this time, but you won't be able to have it for a while. And now I think it was a price thing. It was, it didn't fall in the budget because the difference between non-sugared cereal and sugared cereal was like a couple dollars. And she was watching, but I didn't know that. I thought it was my health, which I guess is a better way to do it. So get clever when you're talking to your children. I just did a recording with a lady who her mom was their only income provider. She didn't make very much money. She goes, we had power turned off 2 different times. And she says, my mom would sit down with us and be like, okay, so on this day, the power is going to be turned off. She goes, we got our candles ready and we were prepared for it. She goes, we never felt like, oh my gosh, she says she made it so normal. And I'm like, oh my heck, I'm so sorry to hear that, but I'm so happy to hear that too. She goes, but I felt loved by my mom. And it's like realizing that that was the most important thing. And she goes, and then also my mom didn't want to live in a really tiny apartment. So we had roommates that lived with us. And I was like, very, very creative mom to be able to make things work, single mom providing, she's got 2 kids. And it's just crazy what some people can do with their money and what some people won't do with their money, however you want to phrase that.
I'm glad that you said that, because a lot of parents forget that the love is the most important thing. It's not what you can provide and what you can give, but the kids is going to remember you being there and the love that they felt during that time.
Most prevalent to them. I have a son. I was going to say a little one. He's not really a little one anymore. He's 17 now. We're getting ready to graduate this year. But I think talking about financial literacy, I don't think it's really not a time it's not too early, to discuss and talk about financial literacy. So with him, like I've been talking about with him since really probably almost since day one. And I think that I've seen the benefits from that, has really paid off, like how he handles money, his emotions with money, things like that. I was fortunate enough to have a grandmother that was very financially literate, and she was always worried about her credit, paying bills, things you signed up and said that you would do. So I kind of followed suit. So I think that's really important because what they see is what they're going to resemble mostly anyway. Because even if you tell them one thing and you're not resembling that, they're usually going to follow what they see you do, at the same time. Yeah. So that I think has really been helpful with me as far as educating him with money. And I think one of y'all had mentioned about like in schools, because actually now he came home one day and he was like, we have to fill out this 1040. I was like, they fill out a 1040 form? This is a tax form. I know adults that don't even know what a 1040 is, but they are kind of placing it into schools more nowadays, which I think is very, very important versus some of the other things that they talk about and discuss and go over in school. These are things that you're going to need on an everyday basis, like how to fill out your taxes and do things like that yourself, because you don't really have to necessarily go to a tax professional to fill out, just basic taxes and things like that. But they are going over that and showing them those things, like that. Dave Ramsey, I hate to keep talking about him, but I know he has some classes that they actually place into different high schools as well too. I forget the name, Financial Peace, I think is what it's called. But that they actually also place into churches and then also into to schools, high schools as well too. So it's good to see those things are now being added into the curriculums. So all right, so we'll move along a little bit. So if you can explain the relationship between mental health and financial well-being and how they can influence each other.
There's a lot that can weigh on your mind and weigh on your emotions with money. So if you're always worried about it, you're not going to make great decisions if you've got a lot weighing on your mind. And so I'm not talking about like those people who are already diagnosed with mental health. These are for people that have accumulated, or maybe they're not managing their money well and they start weighing themselves down. Then they get, besides just laying awake at night, obviously they're not doing well, they're stressed. I know of a situation, one of the groups I'm in, a financial coach, he got a client that the father called, but he had taken him to the ER the night before with a panic attack that was so bad, he had to be hospitalized. And so it's crazy how, yes, these worries and yes, these weights can actually affect our health. And so it's important to just work on one area and take those baby steps to start moving yourself forward. And if you've tried and you're unable to do it, you've got to find a different avenue to get it done. Maybe it's just somebody that's close to you, but won't let you walk all over them. I'm not saying you have to hire a coach, but get somebody who's going to keep you accountable and help you do those baby steps to get yourself out of there, because it will weigh you down. Now, on having said about those that been diagnosed with mental health, my sister is one, and she would just spend money. She had no control. She had no anything. And so, that has all of the added weight on top of it. Plus being, she was one that needed to be medicated, to actually find what barriers and restrictions within her relationship with her husband to be able to provide. Where it looked weird from the outside looking in as like, oh my gosh, he's only giving you that much for groceries. It wasn't that. It was that she would so overspend. And so that was the agreement they made. So really recognizing how your mental health drives your decisions. And if you're somebody that's not been diagnosed with that, just start pulling yourself out of that before you get too deep, like that gentleman who went to the ER, because you don't want to have to let it get that far, and yet it will. So and I know of other situations where traumas from childhood or traumas from any other incidents start manifesting themselves in, impulse spending, because that's where you get your dopamine hit. That's where you feel good. So you're not necessarily a cutter, but now you're a spender. And so learning to recognize what truly is causing these actions is so important. So as a financial coach, I did have to take some training in some, financial health. And if there's a point where I realize there might be some traumas, we have to refer the individual off. So it's so important to be aware of all of those situations.
Do you think that the financial situation places them within those mental health disorders though? Do you find that?
Yeah, I mean, the little bit that I've been exploring, like, yes, I think it's just an, action or a reaction, or it's a way to make them feel better. And so, yeah.
Mhm. Okay. So how can listeners start building? I think we kind of touched on this already, but how can our listeners, start building an emergency fund?
Yeah, so you've got to get clear on where all of your money is going. And so, like I said, the 3 buckets, if you can cover all your bills, cover all your spending from paycheck to paycheck, and then what's left over, you will find a leftover amount. There hasn't been a case where I have not found a leftover amount. With that, be very, very strategic in how you're going to save that for emergencies. I was never a fan of the 3 to 6 months or 6 months to a year for job loss. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me. So when you say, I'm going to start saving for emergencies, you need to define those emergencies. What are those emergencies to you? Are you saving for car repairs or home repairs? If you don't own a home, you don't need to necessarily save for home repairs. And just start going through what's closest to you. So for myself, I save for my car, which is car repairs or car replacement, my home, which is home repairs or home like maintenance with your AC going out, all of those types of things. And then I save for my medical deductible. I have a high medical deductible, so I save for that. That's an emergency to me. And so I build this up. So I've defined it, but yet if there's something outside of that that just comes out of the blue, I still have a bucket of money I can use. But I think it's so clear to kind of identify, what is that for? What is that emergency for? Because I was reading on a post, somebody's like, oh, well, I broke my sunglasses and that was an emergency. So I went to my emergency fund and I got some money. And I'm like, okay, that might have been an emergency for you. But that's why I say, define what your emergency savings are for.
Okay. When you say defining, so you said like have different pockets of money or different buckets of money where you're saving here for car savings, for medical savings. So have different pockets instead of having a general emergency fund.
Yeah, and it also lets you know like how much to save, so you're not just over saving either. So I choose the most expensive thing to replace in my house, and that's what I save for. So right now my furnace is the only thing that hasn't gone out. So I will save for that amount to be replaced. And so if my refrigerator goes out or my washer and dryer goes out, I can still pull from that bucket of money. Same with a car, like I'm putting a car payment away to replace my car later. And if I have repairs or tires or anything along the way, then I can pull it out of that. So kind of gives a general sense, but it's not like, okay, how much am I going to save? I've already got X number of dollars in here. Do I need to save any more? Well, you already defined it. So
Yes. Okay. What are some practical tips for creating a realistic budget and sticking to it?
start with where you're already spending.
Hmm.
Some people are like, okay, you got to get rid of this, and you got to get rid of that, you got to get rid of that. But you're already spending on those things. And I think it's just a matter of clarity and understanding, like, where am I spending? So sometimes I think we mindlessly spend, right? Instead of being mindful about it. And once we list it out, we pay attention to it. Between my first session and my second session, I have clients write a bills due date list. And I had one client, she came back, she goes, yeah, I canceled 4 of those because I just don't need them and I can do them in a different way. And it was a matter of just writing them down for that exercise that brought that much clarity to her. So, look at your expenses. You don't need to dive into all of last year to get a true budget. Start with where you're at. You know how much you need to pay on bills. You know about how much you're spending on groceries, fuel, that type of thing. Throw that in there and then just, that's when I say incomes equals expenses. That's a budget formula. And what's left over would be your savings. And savings is just a future expense. So being able to kind of support that from there, get you moving forward, but don't fall to the pressures of society either. So this thing that you can't stop for a coffee every single day. Well, if that brings you joy, that needs to be in there, right? Something else has to go. And so just think about yourself, who you are with money, where you find the most joy. And if you stick to that and realize, like, some others, because I always have my clients value their expenses, and I'm like, what are your bottom 3? And so they'll list them and I'm like, okay, so if you need to get rid of stuff, that's where you're going to start. And they're like, oh yeah. And I've said, because you've already said these are your top 3, and recognizing that and identifying what you truly value spending your money on can then support you sticking to the rules of your money.
Yes. Okay. Can you discuss some of the common financial pitfalls and mistakes and provide guidance on how to avoid them?
Taking the things you hear to heart as that it's going to work for you exactly the same way. So I always tell everybody, because there's limiting beliefs out there, some limiting beliefs get kind of rolled into rules, things like that. Educate yourself. Again, this goes back to financial literacy, right? Educate yourself on that topic, educate yourself on what somebody has told you, and then go with your gut. Like, if it doesn't feel right to you, it's not right for you.
Right.
And making that adjustment, right? So, don't fall to what is normally out there. I've just done on my own podcast, like, myths of debt, and that all debt is bad. And that's not necessarily true. And so learning to create money rules for yourself is how you will avoid those pitfalls.
Okay. So if someone is wanting to sign up for like your services or your coaching, like what does that program look like?
Yeah, so I have a 4-month signature coaching program. And like I said, the first month we work 4 weeks in a row. We create the budget, we create the management system, all of the strategies for building that financial stability. And then the next 3 months we work towards creating plans of saving or debt payoff towards your goal to help you get there. And so, yeah, 4-month minimum, because I think that's the minimum amount of time to see a transformation and the change in yourself. I also work on money mindset as it comes about typically it comes about through strategy. As you're starting to change things, people start exploring who they are and what they are with money and some resistances or barriers that they see. And then we help to resolve that as well.
Well, was there anything else that you feel like you can touch on that the audience may want to hear when it comes to the finances? And
Like I
that's
said,
for the children, the young adults, the old adults, everybody. Yeah.
yeah. Just start small. Start small. I always tell everybody, like, you hear somebody with an emergency savings of $20,000. You think, I've got to get to that. What's wrong with getting to $1,000? What's wrong with getting to $2,000? So don't, mirror somebody else and take a huge leap. Take the baby steps. Same with paying off your debt. Same with, maybe taking on a loan or whatever. Just have a really good understanding of that.
Okay, well, Miss Higgins, we do appreciate your time. You have given us a whole lot of gems. That is something myself that, well, I think all of us are working on. Just anybody that's going to be listening could use some of the things that you stated. So we're going to let you go ahead. So
Until next time.
there's strength in sisterhood.
Supported sisterhood.
Bye.
Bye.